Welcome to Too Fond of Books. My name is Janelle and this is a reading roundup. In this particular video, I want to share with you the advanced reader copies that I read during September. I had a good run of mostly historical mysteries that I read from NetGalley in September, and so let's just get right into it. The first is a book called A Witness to Murder by Verity, and this is the third in the series. I've talked about this series before on my channel, and I have a copy of the book because I ordered it. I actually think I pre-ordered it. It could be the only book I've ever pre-ordered. Anyways, I really like this series. It's a historical mystery series set in the 1920s, and Lady Eleanor Swift is the main character, and she's just fantastic. She's such a great main character. She grew up traveling around the world a little bit. Her parents died when she was fairly young, and so she's gone from the kind of this adventurous lifestyle to when the first book opens, her uncle had passed away and she inherited the title and the house, and so she had to move back to England and suddenly figure out how to become a lady. And so yeah, and they're set in 1920, so you know that it's the era of the bright young things, and it's very entertaining. In A Witness to Murder, a local MP dies at a dinner party. Now he is known to have a peanut allergy, and so it is assumed that someone added peanuts to the fudge that they were having for dessert. And so Ellie is asked to stand for Parliament in an upcoming election. Now, that was a fascinating part of this book because it is 1920. So the fight for votes for women is still on in full force. Women under the age of 30 have not yet been given the vote. And yet Ellie is eligible to stand as an MP, which I think is such a bizarre thing. So I looked it up. So she can be a member of Parliament because women over the age of 21 have been allowed to stand for Parliament since 1918, so for 2 years, but women can't vote for another women over the age of 21 can't vote for another 8 years. So she can't vote, but she can stand for Parliament, which is so bizarre, right? Anyway, it was great. I love Ellie, like I already said, as a character. I love her butler, Clifford. I described him as imperturbable because that's totally accurate of her butler. He's so great. Oh, and I should mention Eleanor is 29, and so she's 29 years old, so she can stand for Parliament, but she cannot vote yet, which is just crazy. All right, so one thing that I really like about these books, I think they're very well written. They're very funny. I mean, at least I find them very funny. The mysteries are always very interesting, and I find that Verity writes really realistic dialogue. I really appreciate that. So I can highly recommend this series, and I gave this one 4.5 stars. I also read Revenge in Rubies by A.M. Stuart. This is the second one in her series, her Harriet Gordon series. This is set in Singapore in 1910. And interestingly, there is another connection to suffragettes in this book because Harriet, before going out to Singapore, was involved with the suffragette movement and had actually been arrested and spent some time in Holloway where she was force-fed, and that experience has definitely affected her current behavior, and she's quite worried about her reputation. She doesn't want it to come out that she spent time in jail, even though I think the majority of those that are sympathetic to women's suffrage would not feel that that was to her detriment. I mean, she she's like, I spent time in jail, but a lot of them would say, but it was for for a good cause kind of thing. So anyway, so we're in Singapore in 1910. The inspector is Inspector Curran. Sylvie Nolan has been bludgeoned to death in her bedroom, and she is newly married to Colonel Nolan. Now, it was really good because there was a lot going on in this book. There was, for Harriet, she has to face her demons in this book about her reputation and her time in Holloway. And Inspector Curran, as he investigates, has to deal with the close-knit, closed circle of the British Army, because Colonel Nolan is in the Army. His new wife is the daughter of, I think, a general, and her brother is in the Army. And so Inspector Curran has to question people in the Army, but of course he's constantly getting blocked. And so there was just a lot of really interesting political stuff going on in this story. I quite enjoyed it, and I gave it 4 stars. And then I read Mortmain Hall by Martin Edwards. This is the second in his Rachel Savernake series. And these are Golden Age mysteries set in 1930. Now, I read the first one because I wanted to read it before I got to this one, which is good actually, because you get a good introduction to the character of Rachel in the first one. And so I knew, because I'd already read the first one, that even though they are touted as being Golden Age mysteries, they don't feel like Golden Age mysteries. I looked up what Agatha Christie wrote in 1930 or what Dorothy Sayers wrote in 1930. Agatha Christie wrote The Mysterious Mr. Quin, which is a series of short stories. And she also wrote Murder in the Vicarage, which is the first Miss Marple. And Dorothy Sayers wrote Strong Poison, which is a Lord Peter Wimsey, and Documents in the Case, which she wrote with another author, Robert Eustace, I think. So I had those mysteries in mind as I was reading this series, and even though I knew from the first one that they weren't Golden Age, I was still kind of expecting it because they're still advertising them as Golden Age mysteries. And so I have to say that you need to temper your expectations. If you go into this as just a book set in 1930, you will be better prepared for the type of story it is, rather than if you go into it expecting a Golden Age mystery, because it does not feel very Golden Age. They're a lot darker. Some of the issues that come up are not issues that are addressed kind of blatantly in true Golden Age mysteries. If my ranking is because I let that expectation affect my enjoyment of the book. But the book itself and the story itself was good. It was really well written, and there was definitely really interesting elements. So one, it had a great first sentence. The ghost climbed out of a hackney carriage. Right? That totally draws you in. That's a great first sentence. There's also a lot about the London Necropolis Company. The first chapter, Rachel is going to the cemetery. So, and this part is true. So there really was a London Necropolis Company. So they built a dedicated rail line to a new cemetery that was built outside of London. The cemeteries in London were getting full, and so they built this massive cemetery outside the city. I think it's called maybe Brookwood, and then they built a rail line that goes straight into the cemetery, and so they can carry the coffin and they carry the funeral party out to the cemetery. And so in the first chapter, Rachel is on the train, the London Necropolis Railway, interacting with another character. And so that piece of it was fascinating, because I find that whole thing just really interesting. So this rail company, I believe it was like late 1800s, mid to late 1800s, and it ran up until the mid to late 1930s. And so yeah, that piece of it was just really fascinating. I also thought it was very clever. A lot of books open with a prologue and they kind of tease the reader, especially mysteries. They tease the reader with some information and then they get into the story and then it ends with an epilogue. And this book does that, except that it called it the epilogue, even though it was at the very beginning. But that was accurate, because what was happening were the events that happen at the very end of the story. You're just getting this little teaser. And so it's a prologue in the sense that it's placed at the beginning of the book, but it is an epilogue because the events take place at the end of the story. So it starts with an epilogue, and then at the very end, it's epilogue continued. And so I just thought that was, I like that. I've never seen that before. I also loved that he included a clue finder at the end. So this was something that a lot of books in the 30s, mysteries in the 30s, had clue finders. So you read the story, because at the time they were very much puzzle mysteries, and the reader was on the lookout for clues to try and solve the mystery before the conclusion. And so a lot of books, although I've never read any, I haven't seen any actual ones with clue finders, but at the end they list them. These are the clues that maybe you saw or maybe you missed. And then you can go back and read them. And so this book included clue finders, which I thought was really fun. So I did like these books, but because I was expecting something else, I didn't like them as much as maybe I could have. So I gave it 3 stars. I liked it, I just didn't love it. And then I read Murder at Queen's Landing by Andrea Penrose. This is the 4th in the Wexford and Sloane series. And this one I gave 4.5 stars to. I really liked this book in particular, and I really enjoyed this series. So this is a historical mystery series set in London during the Regency. I love the Regency time period. It's such a great time period to set suspenseful, gothic, or mysteries. And so, you know, a historical mystery set in Regency London is just, that's perfect. I love that. So the main characters here are the Earl of Rexford. He is, obviously he's an earl, so he's, you know, an aristocrat, but he is also a brilliant scientist. And so he spends a lot of time at home. His valet is also kind of does a lot of these experiments with him. And he also spends a lot of time with other scientists and other kind of thinkers and experimenters. So he'll spend time at the Royal, I forget what it's called, so the Royal Society or something. Anyway, so he's a really interesting character, but he also does his duty as an earl, and so he has to attend all the society functions and stuff like that. And then Charlotte Sloane is a widow who, and I don't want to reveal too much about her because it might spoil the earlier books, but she's a widow and she has assumed her late husband's pen name as London's leading satirical artist. And so she does need to make money for herself, and she's kind of sort of adopted some brothers who had been living on the streets. And so she, in order to take care of them, she does need to make some money, and so she draws these satirical, quite scathing sometimes, drawings for publication. So Murder at Queen's Landing, a clerk is murdered at the docks, really near actually to the East India Company docks, and his last word was argentum. It's very mysterious. What does that mean? And it was a great story. And then there was also a brother and sister who are friends of Charlotte's and Rexford's, and the two of them go missing. And so I really enjoyed this particular story. There were some great themes in this one: good and evil, right and wrong, truth and lies, friendship, loyalty, secrets, justice, and also kind of that gray area. And so I just really enjoyed that one. And here's a great quote that I think kind of like highlights some of those themes in this book. Decisions were never black and white, and every shade of gray was tinged with consequences. So yeah, I can highly recommend Murder at Queen's Landing, and the entire series actually, by Andrea Penrose. So these are the advanced reader copies that I read in September. So all of these books are now out for you to take a look at and to purchase or to get from the library. And it was a really good little selection of books. So have you read any of these authors or these series? Do any of these books sound intriguing to you? I would love to chat about that in the comment section below. And I will see you for another video soon. Bye.